Hey everybody, welcome to the Yoga in My School podcast. My name is Donna Freeman. I'm the founder of Yoga in My School, and this is a location where we explore all things movement and mindfulness related. And today we're branching, well, I think it's totally youth related for sure, because I use this stuff all the time in my kids' classes, but I also teach adults of all abilities and all ages. I sometimes like to tell people, when people ask me what age groups do I teach everything from 6 weeks old to, I think my oldest student was 92. So, yogis come in all sizes and shapes and ages, and that's what we're going to be getting into today with our very special guest. He's one of my yoga heroes. I believe the movement that he has created and started and advocates for wildly throughout the world is one that we all need to hear. And so it is my delightful pleasure to share some time with Jivana Heyman. And he is the author of this book, Accessible Yoga. If you don't have your hands on this book, you need to have your hands on this book. For the pictures alone and how to adapt poses, I think it kind of blows people's minds a little bit once they start getting into, how do you do Cobra pose against a wall or sitting in a chair or all these things? It's like, no, Cobra pose on the floor. It's like, no, Cobra pose would be anyway, and that type of thing. So we're going to be getting into all that kind of goodness. Jivana is the founder and director of Accessible Yoga. And he was the one who coined this phrase that I think is really well known now in the yoga community, at least if you're anywhere in social media and, the Yoga for Every Body movement and body, awareness, and especially now with everything that's going on in the world for equality and justice, social justice, and all these kind of really big topics. And Jivana is a mover and a shaker in that world and has been for a long time. So Jivana, welcome. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks, Donna. Thanks for having me. I appreciate that and for that introduction.
It's like,
I'm glad you like the book. Yeah.
It's great. It really is. Yeah, as soon as it came out, I was, getting that in my bookcase for sure. So can you tell us a little bit, for people who may not be familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a little bit of some of the pivotal moments in your past that have brought you to where you are today and shaped who you are?
Well, I always like that question because it's hard to say. There's like a few things that did that. Life's so complicated and there's so many different pieces that get you where you are. Usually it's the challenges, I think, that really push us and make us change. So I think for me, a few of those challenges were the fact that I'm a gay man and I came out during the AIDS crisis in the 80s. And so many of my friends got sick and died. My best friend died in 1995 from AIDS, and his name was Kurt. And I talk about him in the book a bit. And I would say that was a pivotal moment for me, and that actually my AIDS activism in general, just that I was really looking at how to shift kind of a lack of understanding that I saw in the mainstream to understand what was happening in the AIDS community. And then what was going on is that I was personally using yoga myself just for my own self-care. And then it just kind of dawned on me that I could become a teacher and share yoga with my friends and my community, people with HIV and AIDS. So that's what I started doing right when I became a teacher. And so I would definitely say that accessible yoga grew out of those things about, really my AIDS activism and my yoga practice and my yoga teaching. And then I think the other big moment for me was just when I moved. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area and had a really great yoga spiritual community. And I really feel like community is essential for our practice. And I moved away to Southern California about 8 years ago. And I was really devastated. Like, I moved for family reasons, but I just was so sad to leave my yoga family. And yet that pushed me, and I think in a really good way, to realize that most of us don't have that. I was really spoiled actually with that tight-knit community in San Francisco. that made me think of creating this bigger organization to support people who do similar work as I do and support myself. I mean, it was ultimately for myself, but I think really the organization of Accessible Yoga Now and the work we do came out of that moment for me of really just feeling like I needed help and realizing that I can offer that. I can offer what I needed to receive.
I
If
love
that
that. And
makes
that's actually part of why I do what I do, because I started way back in the day. Like I started this podcast in 2009, and it was
Wow.
exactly that, a way to reach out to other people who were doing the work. Because I'm up in, northern Alberta, Canada,
Wow.
right? And there is not a lot of support here. At least way back in the day, there wasn't. The
Yeah.
internet was fairly new, and
Yeah.
and so I started reaching out to people. Exactly the same thing. It's like, can I give what I want and what I
Mhm.
need, and hopefully build other people in the process. So I love that. That's wonderful.
Exactly.
Thank you. Um, so you coined this phrase. You came up with this phrase, accessible yoga, which I think is succinct and to the point. But what can you tell us about what's the philosophy behind that phrase and that term?
Yeah. Actually, the phrase came out of a program. Well, what was happening was um, once I started teaching yoga, I soon got into teacher training, and I was leading 200-hour trainings, to train basic yoga teachers, and I was also leading these specialized trainings and helping teachers work with people with disabilities. But what I felt there was a gap personally because my students with disabilities weren't becoming yoga teachers. They weren't taking my 200-hour training.
Mhm.
So initially, the first thing Accessible Yoga did under that name was create an accessible 200-hour program. And so my intention was really like, I love teacher training. I just think it's such an exciting time to go deep into the teachings, because like in public classes, often you just get asana and maybe a little meditation and pranayama. But I feel like to get the philosophy and the subtle practices, that generally happens in teacher training. And I wanted to share that with my students. So Accessible Yoga originally was started as that effort to like give the fullness of yoga to my students. And I think that's why I love the word accessible, because it relates to not only access, access to those teachings, but also is identified as part of the disability movement. So accessibility is a beautiful term in terms of like making the world accessible. In fact, I love it, within the disability rights movement, there's this concept that I find really helpful, which is understanding disability as a cultural concept rather than as a medical
Mm.
concept. And what that means is that, the medical part is that generally we look at disability as a problem. And so the Western medical system is devised to solve that problem and to heal and to fix. And a lot of the cultural side is people with disabilities who say, this is who I am and I'm proud. And like disability pride is more of like a cultural perspective on disability rather than on the fix it, solve it side. And I love that. And I feel like the idea of accessibility connects to that, just making the world accessible. Oh, and the other concept that helps me is to think of a lot of people with disabilities say the issue isn't so much with them, but it's actually the world that has the problem, the challenge, like that the world should be adapted to all of us. And rather than us having to adapt to the world. And I think that's really the essence of my teaching is that yoga, unfortunately, has been presented as like a one size fits all practice in the West. And most people think they have to adapt their body to that and their mind to that practice. But I don't think that's the case. And so I think, again, it's a matter of shifting yoga, which is not hard because, like I say, yoga is by essence accessible already. I mean, it's just really shifting our understanding of yoga, I should say, to look at it, to make yoga adapt to people, if that makes sense. But I would say our organization has a couple other main focuses. I mean, one is on education. So we're focused on educating mostly yoga teachers around accessibility. And then we're also, and other kinds of equity. I mean, we really broadly define accessibility to refer not just to disability, but also like racism, for example, right now, and understanding the way that race affects people's access to these teachings. Or or sexuality or gender identification, you know, or whatever. So I think our work has expanded into that over the last few years, which is exciting for me, and then advocating for that, mostly within the yoga world. So we tend to advocate with other yoga organizations and the yoga media for better representation.
Yeah, and I love that. I love, you know, I was, of course, I stalk you on social media. It is the day and age to do that.
That's what it's for.
That's what it's for. Exactly. And I really appreciated your one post recently where you kind of said, okay, if you're going to go to a protest, just be prepared for what degree of engagement and what that might result in, so that you have a plan. Right. And you could really see your wisdom from the advocacy that you had done in the 80s shining forward, saying, what are you willing to do and what might be the repercussions of some of that? But it was just so well worded and really wise and compassionate in take care of you, know what you're prepared to do, and then do it and step forward into that space. And so many people have a voice that needs to be heard in a variety of ways. And maybe that is in your own home, right? In advocating and standing up and communicating with the people that are right there with you. And maybe that is on, you know, a world stage. And we all have a voice that needs to be heard and compassion that we can extend to one another. And I anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that was helpful. I hesitated to write it because I didn't want to make it about me. You know, I feel like with Black Lives Matter, it's not like the tendency is that white people center themselves in those conversations. And I was trying to just provide some, you know, support to people who are protesting. And I have a lot of experience with that. I mean, I spent years and years protesting around AIDS and other related issues, and got arrested many times. And it had, you know, I mean, these days have definitely brought that back for me. It's almost been slightly traumatic for me personally, just because I had forgotten a lot of it. Like I literally, it's like a different life. You know how you feel like you have like different lives? I mean, I just turned 53. So it's like, I just feel like, you know what I mean? Like that was my 20s. Like I spent 10 years just like on the streets. And it's so funny. Now I have, you know, teenagers and I have all this other work, and it's just like my life is so different. But not really. I feel like my work is similar. It's just taking a different form, like you said. But I want to talk about what you just said. You talked about we each have our own way, you know, to offer some, I don't know what word you use, but I would say it's a service. It's like everyone can offer service. And that's something I'm really interested in actually, how we can understand that as yoga practice. And that's basically what I'm working on for my new book right now, is that idea of how service, well, first of all, that service is a state of mind, and then that's what yoga is for. So yoga is about, in my understanding, yoga is about understanding ourselves better, you know, really analyzing like our biases and our attachments and our conditioning and liberating ourselves from that, you know. So like that to me is what yoga is about. And what that creates, I believe, is a more open mind where we can see things a little more neutrally rather than through our kind of filter of our thoughts and opinions. And I believe the way that shows up in the world is through service, which is a kind of action that's not about me, right? It's action that is focused on, you know, what is the best benefit? What can I do that's most beneficial to myself and others? And like you said, that could be in your family. You know, a lot of people who have chronic illness or disability, like they're not going to go protest on the street. I mean, that's not appropriate for them. So they have other kinds of things they can do. In fact, I've talked to many people who their whole life is spent really just taking care of their body because they have some disability or challenge. Or parents, you know, of children with disabilities. I mean, I know, you know, my kids both have disabilities of different kinds. My daughter has mental health issues and addiction, and my son has learning disabilities. So I just know as you know, as a parent, like that's my main service. Like I really have, you know, I've spent the last 18 years, my son will be 19 in August, but you know, I spent the last 19 years really just focused on them mostly, and that's where so much of my energy and service has gone. And that's appropriate. Like, it's not like I need to be, like you said, I don't need to be doing something else. I need to be doing what's appropriate in front of me. And the way I know is by getting quiet and turning inward to connect with what, you know, where is my heart guiding me? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect sense. I love it. You know, and just, you know, and I like that, always coming back, finding that quiet, especially in a busy and noisy world, where you can get overwhelmed. And I know many people with the beginning of COVID, when we were all anxiously watching the news and what was going to happen, I knew a few people who just, you know, had to turn everything off.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just need to silence that noise and find my heart, and then do what that tells me. I'm like, yes, yes, do that. And as we go forward, as we're getting into this kind of reentry and all that kind of stuff, continue to do that. Right? Your whole life, find your heart and follow that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's interesting. It's a good point in a way with COVID, because like, sure, we have to remain conscious and aware of what's happening so that we can be safe, so we can keep other people safe, but just to a certain point. And then, you know, we're inundated with information, and I don't think that's healthy. I know I struggle with that. My husband always starts to read me the news late at night, and you know, it's like, I don't want to hear it right now. Like, it's not that I don't want to know what the news is, but for me, like, before I go to bed, that's not a good time for me to think about those things. It just gives me less quality sleep. Like, I just get disturbed by it. So it's like, I can read the news in the morning, or I can watch it during the day or whatever, but yeah, that's the way of, well, that's what self-care is actually. So, I mean, people often use that term self-care, and I think it's used so much that it's lost meaning, but self-care to me is a yoga practice where you are sensitive to what you actually need, you know, so that you can be effective in your service, whatever that is. You know?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the most radical acts that we can actually perform is self-care.
Yeah.
Is that connect to self. What do I need in this moment? And then set those boundaries of, you know, no, please don't read me the news just before I go to bed. I'm not going to get a good night's sleep. I'm going to be up and my mind's going to be too busy. We need to do that another time. But that can be a really simple boundary, and other boundaries might be, you know, broader and that type of thing. All right. Now, in the book, you mention an experience that you had at the United Nations Human Rights Commission. And I just want to kind of explore this connection between yoga and human rights. And can you kind of talk about that experience and what you learned there and how it kind of has molded your work?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. That was another pivotal moment for me, actually. I was so lucky to get invited to teach there. They were having an International Day of Persons with Disabilities at the Human Rights Commission, which is in Geneva in Switzerland. And I got to go, and it was so amazing just to be in those spaces, you know, like those rooms where they have like all the different countries' names, you know. And I wasn't presenting to the UN Rights Commission, but it was just like this gathering of disability, I don't know what, like awareness and disability rights activists, leaders from different disability organizations. And I mostly just was there to learn. I mean, it was incredible. And like, the more I listened to them, and since then, the more I followed disability activists, it's just so clear that basic human rights, I mean, if you think of what that means, like what are human rights? Like, what are the things that we feel are intrinsic to us? And I think, so much of it maps directly to the yoga teachings for me, because one of the main human rights that we have is like the right to be happy, you know, the right to be free, you know, not enslaved, actually, not to be free, and to pursue happiness, just like in the U.S. Declaration of Independence, right? Like to pursue happiness. these are basic fundamental human rights. And I think, well, yoga says the same thing. And yoga says it in a really interesting way. If you look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is really where I go, and the Bhagavad Gita, both of them really speak to this idea that our essence is this pure spirit. That Atman is a Sanskrit name, where Purusha is pure spirit, and that's a reflection of the universal spirit, right? So it's not separate from that, but it's individualized. And actually, in the sutras, it is separate. So the sutras confuse people a lot because it actually is a dual. It's duality there. It's not a universal. It doesn't believe in oneness. Like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali actually talk about nature and spirit as two separate things, which I think is really interesting. It's been interpreted by non-dualists. So like the reason we talk about non-dualism so much is that that's been popular over the last, couple hundred years. Anyway, I don't know how so the connection there is that those are essential. In a way, they wouldn't call it human rights, but the teachings offer us these essential qualities of humanity, which is that our core, our heart is pure spirit, and that spirit is joy. It is peace. It is all the things we're seeking. That's who we are. And so the goal of yoga is actually about removing the veil or the whatever is interfering from our experience of that. And I love what I love about yoga too is that it says it in a positive way. So like what I love about the Yoga Sutras is it says that we don't have to gain anything or get anything. It's about undoing. It's about undoing what we've been, all the beliefs we have that cover up that experience of our true nature. And so to me, that just feels so connected to basic human rights, this idea that we all have that basic, you could, in the human rights world, it's more of like what is a right? A right is like something innate to you, right? That's something innate to you. And I think that's what the yoga teaching is saying. Like what is innate to you is your happiness and peace. That's innate to you. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense, right? And I love the fact, like, as you said, way back in the beginning of our conversation, you talked about how, is it the world needs to fit the person or the person the world?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Right? And we're all the same. And I know in my youth and younger, in my 20s, well, you were, fighting for rights. I was traveling the world. So I did a lot of traveling. And at first I thought every land and every people were very exotic and strange. And it was like, oh, wow, I'm learning so much about, how other people interpret the world. And then the opportunity to live in Japan for 3 years. And within about the first 6 months of being there, I realized, actually, they're not that different.
No.
Right? It's like they want the same things that I want.
Right.
And we all want the same things. And it's that joy and happiness. And just seeing people, everyone in the world wants joy and happiness.
Yeah.
And we're all trying to get the same thing, maybe in very different ways we're trying to go about that thing. And we get lost in the differences.
What's so great about yoga is like that yoga offers a technique for finding that peace and happiness. And actually, like I said just earlier, it's not about finding it outside, it's about finding it inside. And so I just love that it's so empowering. It's basically, if you look at the way, I love to talk about white supremacy. And like in the past, when I said it, people always have a reaction. But these days I can talk about it freely, which makes me so happy. And white supremacy is basically the system that we live with inside of. It's beyond capitalism. It's just like this kind of the whole cultural context that has been created in capitalist cultures, like in the US and Canada and most of the Western world, even in Japan and places like that as well. There's still white supremacy there. And anyway, in that system, there's this sense of lack, that we don't have enough. And it causes like scarcity thinking and fear. And I think that's how the politicians and marketing, from corporations manipulate us so readily is because it gets to those basic fears that we have of not having enough. And I feel like yoga is the opposite. Yoga is literally like I don't know what the word is, like opposite, or it's like the yoga says we are enough. Like that's who we are by nature. We don't actually have to do anything to find the things we're seeking. We actually need to do less and turn within. I mean, which is a remarkable statement, actually.
Yeah, just that alone. Do less and turn within. Okay.
Yeah, and I think actually it's revolutionary in a sense, because I'll say this. Usually I like to talk a bit about how yoga has been used by capitalist systems, cultural appropriation, which is the way that a capitalist system will take an indigenous cultural practice and then use it to make money and actually to disempower that community. And in a way, that's what's happened with yoga. I mean, yoga, if you look at the image of yoga in the West, you don't see a lot of Indian people, which is where mostly the teachings came from. There's some talk about yoga teachings actually being from other parts of the world, like Africa as well. But what we're talking about in yoga generally is an Indian practice, and yet it's been taken away from those people and used mostly by white corporations. But what I'm getting at is like, it's not by mistake, and it's not like someone's planning it in the back, but it actually is the way the system is designed to work, which is we are being presented with yoga in a way that it looks like you need to do more. You need to be better. You need to be thinner and more flexible and stronger and more attractive and whiter, and wealthier. And I actually think that's incorrect. I mean, that's not what yoga actually is about. I think the truth of it is uncomfortable because it doesn't fit into the system that we have been trained in, the culture that we're, like the white supremacy culture that we're swimming in, right? That's like what I say. We don't see it's like the fish doesn't see the water. We don't see that culture around us. And I think so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not a mistake to me that yoga is being taught a certain way. And I think my work with accessible yoga is I'm trying to show another way, which is not to say, oh, just adapt the practice, but rather say, the essence of yoga is empowerment. That you already have what you need.
Yeah, I love it. And that kind of leads into my next question. I want to talk about, there's lots going on right now in the world, and it's high time, and thank you. And let's do this. Let's really get into this, and let's make some fundamental changes that we have more equality and more social justice. But what role can the yoga community play? How do you see, there may be somebody who's a studio owner or a teacher, and they're like, I want to be involved, but I look at myself, I'm like, well, I'm a white female. I am the privileged community in the yoga world. What can I do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yesterday I hosted a conversation with Kelly Palmer, who I get to work with in accessible yoga, and I asked her that question. I was trying to get to, the core of that. And also I just wrote a blog about it myself. I would just say that, I have a lot of ideas. One is, I'll just start with the yoga teachings again, since we're talking about that, right? Like the philosophy of yoga is about revealing the truth of who we are. And the way we do that is by, like I mentioned, is kind of undoing the illusions that we've created about ourselves, which you could call our attachments. And I think that is, to me, the core of the teachings. Like, so I actually would say that that's actually what yoga is. So I just want to say that practice, like asking that question, is doing yoga. The practice of revealing our own conditioning and understanding the way our ego works is what yoga is about. If you look at the Yoga Sutras again in chapter 2, like Patanjali starts by, it's the portion on practice. It's basically how to practice yoga. And he very early on in the beginning there, he talks about the kleshas, the obstacles to our enlightenment, which first one is ignorance of our true nature, which is, like I said, it's this ignorance about not realizing that we are spirit, or that we're spiritual beings. The second one is egoism. And egoism is a misidentification with the body and mind rather than with the spirit. So we've identified with body and mind rather than with spirit. But I also think, and the next one is attachment and aversion. So he says the ego is basically made of those things, right? The ego is made of attachments and aversions, things you want, things you like, and things you don't want and don't like. So likes and dislikes, that's really where we get at these basic ideas of our, kind of the I don't want to say prejudice, but like the color of our mind. And that's actually the word that he uses. The word for non-attachment is vairagya, which is, without color. So it's like our mind has been distorted by the thoughts that we're having and the identifications we have. Point being that I think the work of undoing racism or white supremacy or any kind of discrimination is to analyze yourself. And that's hard to do, but that's what yoga is for. And you do it through the practice that you already have. You do it through asana, pranayama, meditation, journaling, self-reflection. And Patanjali uses the word svayaya, which is reflection, really looking at your mind clearly. So I feel like that's the most important thing we can do, is just become more aware of ourselves and our own thinking patterns, samskaras, like the way that our mind tends to go in the same, like we tend to repeat thoughts, right? Like we have repetitive thoughts. And what Kelly mentioned yesterday is how so much of it is based on fear. And like I said before, like white supremacy is based on lack, that there's not enough. And we have to fight each other for survival. And I think those are the kinds of thoughts and beliefs that we can begin to undo through yoga practice. So I guess I would just say that's it, really. That's the key, right? Is that we should do our practice.
Yep. Do the work.
Do the work, yeah. And also realize that yoga's been used as social justice forever. In my blog today, I wrote about Gandhi. I mean, I know there's issues with Gandhi, but he was remarkable, and he overturned the British colonial government in India through yoga. He used the yoga teachings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a long history of yogis being rebels.
Yeah. And this is why, because Gandhi says it was about, he called it satyagraha, which is the power of the truth. And that's the same idea, right? That revealing the truth, if you can connect to the truth of who you are and to your beliefs, that has power. And that he says that truth is love, right? That truth is love. And so when you connect to that truth, you're connecting to love. And that will move you. That will guide you.
Wonderful. All right. So I want to get into this because I think this is where a lot of people come, when they go from their practice and then they get into a yoga teacher training and then they're yoga teachers. And it's like, okay, now I know. Well, they understand that they don't know, but they know. And so when I was first taught, I was taught a very rigid style of yoga. And it was all about, it has to be done this way. There were lots of rules. And I don't teach that way at all anymore. And I'm thankful for the rules so that I know how to break them. Does that make sense? It's like, let's kind of push those boundaries. But what do you say to people who are still maybe stuck in, this is the way that yoga is done? That, right? They've been taught that there is one way, and it's very precise. And I just find it really pervasive in the yoga community, that type of style of teaching. And how do we take people from there to a more accessible viewpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was also trained that way, actually. So I think, unfortunately, yoga is also within the same systems of everything else, the way we're taught and trained, and even a lot of the teachings are presented in that way, right? Like, my way is the best. I teach the best yoga. This is the only way. And really, a lot of that is just ego. And, I think, to me, there's yoga for everyone. And I mean, everyone has their own practice and their own way, and it's all good. Like, I'm happy to hear about anyone's practice and understand the reasoning behind it. And I guess that's where I usually start in my teacher training. I do, I really like to ask people why you do it. So if you can explain to me why you're doing that practice, and then maybe why you're doing it in that particular way, then I'll listen to you. Like, I'm not interested in you just telling me it's the best, it's the way, it's how I was taught. Like, that doesn't matter to me, but I would like to understand why. So I think if you can get at the why, then you can actually begin to explore how to adapt. Because if you understand, like, oh, well, the reason I do this sun salutation this way, and this many times, is because I'm waking up my body, and I'm moving the circulation, and I'm getting my heart rate up, and I'm also stretching all the muscles and the fascia and all that stuff. And then you think, okay, well, you know what? You can do that, all those same things, but you could do that sitting in a chair. So for someone who can't stand, they could maybe do that same, get the same benefits. So I guess that's where I head to, is like, why? Just explain why to me. And I'm always asking myself that too. Like, when I'm asked to do something, I just want to know why. Why.
I love that. And that's always my question too. It's like, why are we doing this? And what's the ultimate goal? Like, and is there a different way, a different route to get to that goal? And I'm like, there's a route for everybody.
Yeah.
To get to the why. And everyone needs to travel their own journey.
Right. And actually, I would say, and this is a very Western thing I'm going to say, but I think we also need to look at safety and efficacy, because I also believe in science. And I think that, it's really clear, like, some things are more effective than others. And so to me, that's another thing I want to know. Is that the most effective way to do it? And also, is it the safest way to do it? Because I don't want to create more problems. And I have to say, like, I myself have gotten injured in yoga many, many times. I've had many students, well, I should say, I've had some students get injured as well, unfortunately, but I realize it's unavoidable, but I think it's our job as yoga teachers to keep our students safe and to give them an effective practice. And so I think that comes from really analyzing what is the best yoga for that person in this moment, not maybe that person yesterday or tomorrow, but like right now, like, what do they need in this moment? And I think I think we all know that in our heart. And sometimes we just have the fallback of like, oh, that's what I was trained, because it can be scary. And so I guess I also want to not criticize yoga teachers. I have a real, like, my desire is to support yoga teachers and to have compassion, because I'm one and I've been there and I know it's scary. And sometimes people look at you like you should know everything, and we don't. So that's okay. It's okay to say, I don't know. And if you say, oh, well, that's the way, I just do it that way because that's how I was trained, but I don't know why, that's fine. Like, I'm fine with that answer. I'm just saying, don't tell me it's better than another way, just because someone told you that was the way to do it. Does that make sense? So, but it's okay. We're yoga teachers are a funny group, because often we don't get that much training. Like, a 200-hour training is quite short, and most other body movement specialists, if that's what we're doing, get a lot more training than that. So I think we put ourselves in a difficult situation, and we don't have a clear scope of practice. We don't know exactly what we're teaching, where the limits are to our professional work. And that's, Yoga Alliance in the US did release a scope of practice in February, which I find really helpful. I don't think people are aware of it yet, but I think that's something that would help yoga teachers to know, like, what we're allowed to talk about and teach about and what we're not allowed to talk about and teach about. I think that would just help. It's like a boundary, right? It's like, how, just work within your boundaries.
Yeah. Stay in your lane, people. And then I always tell all my teacher trainers, I'm like, and then have a list of people you can refer people to.
Yeah.
Know a nutritionist, know a physiotherapist, know a massage therapist, like, have all these people and then refer it out. Like, oh, you know what? I am not a physiotherapist. that would be a really good question for someone, or a kinesiologist. Like, I don't have that training. I am a yoga instructor. Want to talk to me about breath and mindfulness and all that kind of stuff? I'm your girl.
Yeah.
But,
And also with yoga therapy, I feel like a lot of yoga teachers end up crossing that line. And it's still very new. You know, yoga therapy was really codified in 2014. So we're just figuring it out now. Like, where is a yoga teacher? What is their scope of practice? And what's the scope of practice for a yoga therapist? And it's not the same. You know, it's not the same. And yet, I would say, to me, accessible yoga is, often gets confused with yoga therapy. And I really would, I just want to clarify that it's not the same thing. That making yoga accessible for anyone who comes to you is really the job of a yoga teacher. So adapting the practice to the person in front of you is your job. That's within the scope of practice of a yoga teacher. What a yoga therapist would do is address a specific condition. A yoga therapist would really do intake and understand the background, like why, like your medical history, the medications you're on, the surgeries you've had, and all that. And then with that information, look at your goals, your personal goals for your practice, create a plan for you, then implement that plan, and then follow up with you on how it went. A yoga teacher is more like someone who would offer public instruction and be able to just address whatever person that comes into the room without asking about medical information, by the way, because that's not within our scope of practice, and really just focusing on how can I keep you safe today? Like, I mean, you know, if you have physical things going on that I need to know about so you can do these practices safely, then I would need to know, but I don't need to know anything about your medical history, and I'm not going to ask you about that. Oh, so I guess I just want to say one thing though. So I actually have an issue when yoga teachers say that, oh, well, I can't be the teacher for everyone. I don't know if you know what I'm saying. Like, I hear that a lot. You know, I'm not the teacher for everyone. I'm just the teacher for the people who come to me. And I want to say, yeah, I get that. Like, I get that. You know, you will be just the teacher for the people who come to you. But I actually don't, I think it's a bit of a cop-out. I actually don't think that's true. I think you are a teacher for everyone. If you put yourself out there publicly, you need to be prepared that people that you didn't expect will come to your class. And to me, it's not okay to turn them away. If you don't know what to do with them, then you tell them that. You can be honest with them. But I feel like it's our job to make our classes accessible. In fact, I actually think it's in the US, even at least for now, it's the law that a public class needs to be available to anyone who's interested in attending. You know, that's the law in the US. So people with disabilities have rights to attend any class they want. And someone with a disability might arrive and just be interested in what you're doing, and it's okay. Like, they're not coming to you as a yoga therapist. You don't have to heal them. You don't have to figure out what's going on with their body or their mind. You just need to offer them yoga. And I think that's, sometimes people just want that experience, you know, just like to be in a shared space.
yeah, and I love that. And I really I run into this a lot in school classes, right? Because most school classes are integrated, and you just have kids come to class. Yeah. And it's wonderful, and you have to be pretty flexible with that, because all of a sudden you've got, you know, unique abilities that are walking through the door, and you're like, great, let's go with this. Let's make this fun and encouraging and welcoming and a wonderful experience for everyone who is there. And I think that is really what your work is about, and it is what I preach. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, everybody deserves a space in the yoga world, and yeah,
it seems like schools have gotten more integrated than yoga studios. Seems to me like schools, you know, we used to segregate kids with disabilities, and they couldn't come into the regular classrooms, and then we learned that that's not effective. You know, that integrating classes is more effective for everyone.
For everyone,
so we could do that
better
in yoga.
For everybody. Yes.
For everybody. We could do that in yoga too. You know, I think we're really caught up in this like thing about being advanced asana, and it's just, it's a trap. It's really a trap for us. Yeah. Because what happens when you get older? What happens when you have an accident and get injured? Are you not in advanced yoga anymore? Can you even do yoga anymore? You know, so.
Yeah, We could talk forever, I'm sure. All right. One last question before we close. All right.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest shift that you would like to see in how yoga is taught and the general understanding of its purpose in our lives? What would you, if people could just move a little towards something, what would you like them to see?
I mean, I actually think we touched on it around svadhyaya and that reflection, the practice of knowing yourself. That to me is the essence of yoga, and I think it's coming up right now. Like the whole world is being asked to look at itself around race and Black Lives Matter, and I feel like that's yoga. Like what I see happening is like the world is becoming more conscious. That's yoga, right? Becoming more conscious, more self-aware. And I feel like we can, like, how many millions of people practice yoga? It's like all of us can be doing that on a personal level, right? Like just waking up a little bit more and being more conscious of our own biases, our own prejudices, our internalized racism, ableism, homophobia, the kind of self-hatred and self-talk we have. I mean, I just think that is probably the most devastating part of it all, is how we talk to ourselves. So I don't mean to criticize. Honestly, I think this is a way to be free. Yoga is a liberation practice, and that comes through analyzing and understanding the way that we work, the way that our minds work, our misunderstandings about the world, and then being more clear.
Wonderful.
Anyway, thanks for asking. You had some great questions.
Thank you. I so appreciate your time. And can you tell everybody who's listening where they can find you and all the wonderful work that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, you can find accessible yoga at accessibleyoga.org. And I also have a website, jivanaheyman.com. And also we're on Facebook a lot. We have lots of Facebook groups, including the Accessible Yoga Community Group, which is where we're doing live conversations every week about everything that's happening in the world. And accessibleyogatraining.com. In fact, I'm leading a live online training for the first time next week. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, thanks for having me and for what you're doing. Thanks for creating this platform.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. We have been speaking with Jivana Heyman. He is the founder and director of Accessible Yoga. I highly, highly recommend you follow him and get a copy of this book. I think you can see it. I'm in the backyard. It's sunny and beautiful with the birds singing. So, it's summertime. You got to take advantage of it. So thanks everybody for listening. If you have enjoyed what we've been chatting about, please express your appreciation with a share, with a like, with a rating. All those kind of things are extremely valuable and help other people to find the podcast and to find the work that we do and all the love that can be found in the yoga community. It has been an absolute delight chatting with you, and I wish it would just keep going on and on. We could be here for a while. But thanks everybody for listening, for being here. Have a wonderful day. Namaste.
Thank you.